Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So you've decided to start a rebellion. Maybe you're an Imperial senator who remembers the good old days when you actually had power in the Senate, back when the Empire was the Republic and the Chancellor was just some glorified MC for Senate discussions. Of course, you don't know how to actually start a rebellion, but like most things in the galaxy, all you really need is some galactic credits to get things moving. And so you start casually funneling money to this new cause from your own private accounts. There are definitely privileges to service, and there's no denying that your years as a representative for the Republic has given you access to several lucrative financial opportunities that are all completely legal. In more developed and organized political systems, corruption is a little bit more civilized and legalized. Funding like this goes a long way to provide a rebel fighter everything they need, from blasters, explosives to armor, but also safe houses, transport, and secured communications. And thanks to the Empire's increasingly strict and punitive crackdowns on the civilian populace, there are now new candidates popping up daily. Of course, vetting these individuals and making sure they're sane and capable and, totally not Imperial spies, that is also very important. But teaching a rebel the basics of being an insurgent, how to use a blaster weapon, how to conceal yourself, and how to maneuver and communicate and work with a small team, well, that only takes a few months at most. The rebellion was able to take little shrimpy intellectuals like Karis Nemec and turn them into a warrior poet within a relatively short time and with relatively few resources. And take a look at Nemec in this firefight. He knows how to take cover and shoot from cover better than any stormtrooper I've ever seen. In the end, it wasn't Nemec's training that let him down. The training was solid. It was more that he couldn't handle the massive weight of all the credits he had stolen from the Aldhani garrison. Now, Nemec probably received more training than most rebel soldiers, and this is because he was an operative who was a part of a very, complex heist. He had to figure out how to blend in with an Imperial Army patrol and infiltrate an Imperial garrison. Other rebels that joined the infantry were far less prepared. During the mid-run retreat, rebel units like the 61st Mobile Infantry suffered high rates of attrition because they were constantly fighting one battle after another. And so they basically recruited randoms from the battlefield. They vetted them and put them into mixed units with veteran soldiers. Some of them turned out to be spies and others survived. The Rebel Alliance might have been the good guys during the Galactic Civil War, that much is clear. But make no mistake, rebel commanders were not above sending ill-equipped, ill-trained troops right into the meat grinder in order to win some kind of strategic success. This is just the evil of war, I guess. But that was the Rebel Army. The Rebel Navy, however, was formed on a completely different set of principles. Given the fact that this was a galactic war, without a Navy, the Rebel Alliance wouldn't be able to spread its influence across the galaxy. And more importantly, it wouldn't be able to escape the grasp of the Empire and the Imperial Security Bureau by staying mobile. And so what the rebellion desperately needed to become a real threat against the Empire were pilots, mechanics, crew members, and officers for larger ships. The only problem was that the Empire made it extremely difficult for the rebellion to get their hands on this kind of personnel. And you couldn't just learn how to be a starfighter pilot without the right equipment and training. But before we get there, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com. It's the best place to get a lightsaber without being separated from your birth parents and inducted into a monastic order of enlightened killers who justify their actions by swearing off from attachments and wearing robes. What? It's completely true. And better yet, ownersaber.com will sell you a lightsaber with no judgment, no strings attached. And they have a huge offering on selection. One of my recent favorites is the newly added Kyber Core Saber, which has an open compartment so that you can see the Kyber crystal at the heart of the weapon. It's the little details that get to me. Anyway, ownersaber.com is rolling out Afterpay at checkout. This allows you to break down your payment for a lightsaber into 4 to 6 smaller weekly payments. This is only available for people older than 18, and there are no hidden costs or interest, but if you miss a payment, there are late fees, and this can really stack up. So please be financially disciplined if you're going to try to use Afterpay. And also, all lightsabers right now are 30% off with free shipping, and you can use our promo code EWOC, that's all caps, for an additional $15. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. First, the Empire disbanded most of the local militias and planetary defense forces in the galaxy and recruited its members for their own Imperial Army and Navy. For instance, on the world of Irrijansi, the local air cav unit was dismantled and the Starfighter pilots were given an opportunity to sign up for the Imperial Navy, which some did. Others, though, like Antok Merrick and Garvin Dries, disliked what they saw with the Imperial Pilot Training Program and decided to join the rebellion. Just like in the rest of their military, in the Imperial Navy, the policy was to remove the individual from the equation and turn these pilots into numbers and statistics. It was easier to throw away TIE fighter pilots as cannon fodder and get the mission accomplished in this way. And instead of developing a bond and ownership with one starfighter and one ground team, the pilots in the Empire were rotated around and assigned random fighters. Now, a lot of these Imperial protocols are actually pretty normal in larger military air forces, but when you come from something like a small planetary defense force, you're not going to be used to this kind of bureaucratic way of dealing with personnel. And I think for guys like Antok Merrick and Garvin Dryce, who were already pretty experienced senior officers, the idea of starting out new and being just a statistic rubbed them the wrong way. And they most likely also had an inkling that these high-stepping, jackboot-wearing individuals were kind of evil. Again, age, wisdom, and experience win out. But Merrick and Dryce were in the minority back then. Most pilots weren't exactly aware of what the Empire was and saw it as another paycheck and a continuation of a career that they might not want to throw away. Being a planetary defense force pilot was very prestigious, but you know what was even more prestigious? Joining the Imperial Navy and being a TIE fighter pilot. It was definitely better than, quitting completely and becoming a freighter captain. And joining the Rebel Alliance in those early days was akin to joining an insurgency that was labeled by everyone as a terrorist organization. Not only were most people afraid of dying immediately because of the might of the Empire, they also didn't trust an organization that was linked to, people who were clearly terrorists like Saw Gerrera and his partisans. There are also no financial incentives or future career prospects in being a rebel at that time. Simply put, no one believed that the rebels could win. The only people the rebels were getting through their recruitment had a personal agenda against the Empire, which made things even more difficult to deal with. An unruly infantryman, he could be isolated and thrown into the brig, but an unruly pilot, well, they could just steal your starfighter and run away or cause a lot of big headaches during an operation. Starfighters were simply more important strategic assets than a group of soldiers on the ground. And so in those early days of the rebellion, things were very casual. There was no real consequences for deserting your unit or going on an extended leave should your mental health require it or something. I mean, there were consequences, it's just that no one was there to enforce the consequences. Rebel pilots knew their worth and so did their commanders. While rich donors like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma could always buy more used Y-Wings and A-Wings, good pilots were nowhere near as easy to get. In the earlier days of the rebellion, the Starfighter Corps basically avoided direct contact or long-engaged dogfights. They mainly focused on patrolling near rebel bases and the occasional hit-and-run attack on soft Imperial targets like their logistics network. Mon Mothma was heavily criticized for her lack of aggression by other insurgent leaders.
Your losses today stem from your leaders' cowardice, their unwillingness to take decisive action against the Empire. All across the galaxy, your people suffer while the leaders of this rebellion refuse to act.
Saw was a great fighter, don't get me wrong, but he never saw the larger strategic picture, which is what Mon Mothma was focused on. She understood just how limited the rebels' resources were. Any major engagement against the Empire that resulted in a conventional battle could easily destroy all of the rebellion's reserve forces, making it unable to defend itself or carry out future operations, which is exactly what happens during the Battle of Atollon when the Massassi group and Phoenix Cell get trapped by Thrawn and lose the majority of their force. In those earlier days, when forced to stand and fight, the rebellion lost way too much personnel and ships to make it worth it. And so before the Battle of Scarif, the rebellion faced a huge dilemma. They needed to strike out to convince people that they could actually defeat the Empire, and they also needed to strike out to get more resources, but each one of these missions, exacted a heavy toll, especially on their Starfighter Corps. Now, if you've learned anything from this channel, you'll know that as each side of a galactic civil war introduces new tactics, weapons, and personnel, the battlefield will quickly evolve. At the end of a conflict, no military remains unchanged from where it was at the beginning of the conflict. And if the rebellion were a faction in some 4X grand strategy game, its one big advantage is that ideologically speaking, its cause was pretty righteous and agreeable. Mon Mothma's steady hand made sure that the rebellion focused on the hearts and minds of the galaxy rather than on just tactical victories where you destroy Imperial garrisons and ships. Mon Mothma knew that the rebellion never really stood a chance against the Empire in a straight-up fight. But the more crazy the rebellion made the Empire, the more missteps that the Empire made, the more the rebellion could benefit from it. Every time the Empire retaliated against the rebellion, it severely pissed off the citizens of the galaxy and sometimes even the very soldiers and pilots that served the Empire. By simply existing and not losing, it was a huge win for the rebellion and a great catalyst for more new recruits to join them. Now, Antok Merrick, shortly after joining the rebellion with Garvin Dries, would be appointed commander of the entire Starfighter Corps. He would also be assigned the rank of general. The fact that he was also flying as Blue Leader during the Battle of Scarif should give you an idea of just how small the Rebel Starfighter Corps was and how thinly stretched their personnel was. Antok Merrick would be forced to quickly come up with a new Starfighter doctrine for the Rebels' needs, and he was also in charge of vetting various ships and platforms for the Rebel Alliance to adopt. For example, you have the UT-60D U-Wing. After Incom Corporation was nationalized by the Galactic Republic, a shipment of U-Wings were mysteriously lost and somehow ended up in Rebel Alliance hands, most likely thanks to some manipulation of records by Bail Organa. It was up to guys like Merrick and Dries to basically take a look at this platform and determine whether it'd be useful for the rebellion and how the rebellion would use it. Prior to the Starfighter pilots actually taking a look at the platform, a lot of people wanted to use this as an escort fighter. But Merrick recognized the ship's potential as a transport vessel and would hand it over to Rebel Alliance Special Forces. I think Merrick and Dries realized very quickly that the U-Wing, while maneuverable and fast for a support vessel, just wasn't quick enough to be an escort fighter. And so it was their experience as Starfighter pilots that really enriched the rebellion's choice here. And because of their good call, the U-Wing would play a pivotal role in the theft of the Death Star plans. It was also Merrick and Dries that would ultimately settle on the Incom Corporation T-65B platform as the main fighter for the Republic. Prior to this, most Rebel fighter squadrons would utilize A-Wings and Y-Wings. Merrick and Dries chose this platform because they understood who exactly they would be recruiting to the rebellion. Veterans from planetary defense forces like them, bush pilots from the Outer Rim, freighter captains shipping goods on the Hydian Way. Without a proper pilot training pipeline being set up, Merrick and Dries knew that the rebellion had to rely on platforms that were very easy to learn how to fly. And since the Incom X-Wing shared the same control surfaces as the T-16 Skyhopper, one of the most common civilian ships in the Outer Rim, it was an obvious fit for the rebellion. But even with these easier ships to fly, the rebellion simply didn't have enough experienced pilots. Most Rebel Starfighter units had only a handful of replacement pilots for each craft, and not the 2 or 3 you would usually see in rotation in a normal-sized unit. During the Battle of Yavin, for instance, there were only maybe 4 or 5 replacement pilots left to back up Yellow and Red Squadron. This included Fake Wedge, by the way. This was a clear sign that while the Rebels had a few squadrons operational by the time the Battle of Scarif started, there still weren't enough personnel to fill out all of the command and support roles that the Starfighter Corps needed. But as we mentioned, the Empire started making problems for itself. We see signs of this in all the media content that takes place in the years leading up to the Galactic Civil War, whether it's Solo or the Rebels series or Andor. Dissent was increasing, and the Empire's training and military doctrine were beginning to reflect a more hawkish approach when it came to stamping down on dissidents. Remember, the Imperial Navy at its core was still very similar to the Republic Navy. You could throw out the old starfighters and capital ships, but there are still basics in how you trained pilots, how you educated them, how you disciplined them. And these things couldn't just be changed overnight. Imperials weren't trained to be monsters from the get-go because it's just ineffective for your military to go around randomly shooting innocents. Usually when units start committing war crimes, it's because of a breakdown of the chain of command, a failure of the leadership, and a breakdown of discipline. And as the Empire began falling apart and the rebellion began to grow rapidly, it made the Empire unhinged and more desperate. And as the Empire started sliding towards more brutal and cruel measures, a lot of Imperial pilots with a moral compass started leaving. So one of the things that the Empire did a great job with was taking all of the various school systems in the galaxy and then tying them all together with the Imperial Academy system. So all children in the galaxy, no matter where they were, would take these standardized proficiency tests, and at the age of 16, the ones that did the best were invited to join a federal academy. Not all academy schools were the same, but they all taught a similar curriculum that prepared young Imperial cadets well for the job ahead of them, whether they were going to join the Imperial Navy or Army. Depending on the individual's personality and proficiencies, after they graduated the Imperial Academy, they can go on to more schooling. This meant joining more specific schools like Stormtrooper Academy. Or if their grades weren't good enough, they would just be sent to a clerical unit. The best of the best, however, were sent to an Imperial Naval Academy, where they could train to become fighter pilots and bridge crew. Here's the thing though, these best of the best were often individuals who were highly intelligent, and usually highly intelligent people are also pretty individualistic and creative, and these were really not things that meshed well with the more authoritarian system the Empire was trying to create. But these were also the qualities you wanted in a fighter pilot. It was an extremely deadly and competitive job, and you couldn't just be average to survive. And it became very apparent for these intelligent individuals that the Empire was slowly losing its mind and descending into chaos. I mean, at one point, officers were ordering their cadets to do completely illegal things.
Do not fire. We surrender. We are heavily damaged and have wounded aboard. Repeat, we surrender.
Destroy the vessel as ordered.
But Imperial protocol is to board.
Destroy the vessel as ordered.
That clip was from a training simulation that took place in Sky Strike Academy, one of the most elite Imperial Navy academies designed to create TIE fighter pilots. And Wedge Antilles was going through a test along with Rebel insurgent Sabian Wren, who had infiltrated the school looking for defectors. Wedge and a group of students managed to send out a signal to the rebellion. They're the ones who instigated this whole operation. And let's be honest, guys, if Wedge and his friends were Imperial Army troopers, they most likely would not have gotten a Rebel operative here to extract them. But a few pilots, especially those with Imperial training, were definitely worth the risk. I mean, heck, I wouldn't be surprised if Rebel recruiters were just telling young kids, hey, join the Empire, become a starfighter, and then steal one of their ships, and then join us with all the training. Also, take this holographic picture of Princess Leia in a metal bikini. She'll be waiting for you right here, boys. Ah, Rebel PsyOps. Just make sure when you do steal that ship to run away, it has a hyperdrive, because that's why TIE fighters don't have hyperdrives. Now, in case you don't know who Wedge Antilles is and would become, well, he would be responsible for the destruction of the second Death Star, and he was one of the few survivors of the Battle of Yavin. He would spend his career as a squadron leader. He would refuse to take promotions to become like a rear admiral, and he would train countless fighter pilots all throughout the war. A squadron full of moisture farmers and freighter pilots can truly benefit from having just one Imperial pilot. That's how good these guys were. And it wasn't just Wedge Antilles who joined early. You had other guys like Biggs Darklighter, a close friend of Luke Skywalker. He was considered one of the most talented fighter pilots on Red Squadron. You also had Thane Kyrell, who was recruited by Wedge Antilles shortly after the Battle of Yavin. He would take part in the famous retreat at the Battle of Hoth as a part of Corona Squadron. Then we have Iden Versio, who was a Special Forces operator and also a pilot. She would lend her expertise to the rebellion as well. Now, the latter two individuals deserted the Empire because of two main events. For Thane Kyrell, it was the destruction of Alderaan that made him severely question his role in the Empire. Granted, not a lot of people, even Imperials, knew the real reason why Alderaan just disappeared. And the subsequent destruction of the Death Star hardened many Imperials' resolve. But still, a lot of Imperial pilots also knew exactly what happened, and around the Battle of Yavin, a lot of Imperial pilots would defect to the rebellion. I'm sure other Imperials also wanted to defect, but being a pilot just made everything a lot easier. Galen Erso chose an Imperial pilot, Bodhi Rook, to get his message to the rebellion, not an Imperial stormtrooper, for that reason. And the second event that caused Iden Versio to defect was Operation Cinder. This was a cruel scorched earth policy carried out by Emperor Palpatine after his death. It targeted many pro-Imperial worlds with super weapons in order to punish the Empire and also keep resources out of the hands of the New Republic. It was just deemed too evil and chaotic for many of the Imperials left fighting. I think the Rebel strategy of waiting for Imperial pilots to defect falls directly into line with Mon Mothma's grander strategy for the rebellion. Again, it wasn't about tactical victories. Occasionally you did have to strike out against the Empire to show people you were serious, but really it was all about protecting innocent civilians, getting supplies to refugees, and protecting themselves. The rebellion was pretty defensive in nature for most of the early parts of the war. And that's because Mon Mothma truly believed that by being the best version of themselves, by providing an alternative to the Empire, it was just a no-brainer that people would eventually join. I think this is a really important lesson that we can all learn from. Instead of focusing on attacking your enemies, be the best version of yourself. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.